Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 29. I am your host Dan Matson, and this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, and tradition of wooden boats. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. Great to have you back. Hopefully you've been here before. If not, hopefully you'll join us again next week. Today's featured segment is an interview with Steve Chapain. Steve is the owner of Hudson Point Boat Shop. That is in Port Townsend, Washington, in the U.S. of A. Steve's a great guy. I first met him at the Northwest Maritime Center in their boat shop there. He was working on spars for the schooner Martha, I believe it was. They were like 60 feet long, Sitka spruce, bird's mouth construction spars. Got an intro there and then set up an interview with Steve. And Steve has taken over the rights and molds and things to build Pocock wooden racing shells. Those have been built since, I believe, the early 1900s. So stay tuned for the interview. It's going to be great. I'd love it if you would connect with me. There's a bunch of ways to do it. One way would be to go to my homepage and click on the subscribe button for my e-news list. It's on the upper right-hand corner with an arrow on it. Or you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. You can email me, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can also subscribe to my podcast via iTunes, so that every time I release a new show, it automatically appears on your computer or your smartphone or your MP3 player. And if you like the show, I'd love it if you went to iTunes and gave me a 5-star review. That would be really cool. You can also find me on Pinterest. What's the other one called? Yeah, Twitter. That's right, Twitter and Facebook. Look up for Wooden Boat Dan, and you'll see me there. And I'm having fun. I'm having a lot of fun with Pinterest, as I've mentioned before. I think it's a pretty cool site where you can kind of visually organize things. So I've got some boards up there that are kind of fun. I would encourage you to look for that. Anyway, it's been another good week in the wooden boat world. Not that I'm in that world all the time, but I do think about it quite a bit. So you could say mentally I'm in that world quite a bit. I got a phone call a couple days ago from Peter. I forget Peter's last name, starts with a G. And Peter is a volunteer at KPTZ Radio in Port Townsend, Washington. And he is starting or has started a half-hour spot called Boat Talk. And it sounds like it's focused on local boating and traditional boating and that sort of thing. And Peter asked if I would possibly like to get involved in that somehow. So we had a good conversation, and they may air a few of my podcasts on their radio show. I might show up there and do an interview. So it's fun stuff. I really shows me the word's getting out, and people are enjoying the podcast, so that's awesome. Also, I got some comments, or a comment on the website, which is really cool. This is from Jason Oliva. Let's see. Jason says, I started listening to your podcast a couple weeks back and have thoroughly enjoyed all of the interviews and stories. I am originally from Cape Cod and have been around boats my whole life, but just recently became interested in building them. I am currently working on my second Adirondack guide boat. I also meet with a group out of Kingston, Mass. on Wednesday nights when we are restoring an old Duxbury duck boat. I've told all the guys in the class about your podcast, so you should have a following on the East Coast too. There are quite a few boat shops here in New England, and I'm sure they all have some good stories and information if you ever want to take a field trip. Keep up the good work. It's much appreciated. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Jay, for those kind comments. I love to get emails like that. I'm glad people on the East Coast are listening. It's not just a West Coast show. It's not just a US of A show. This is an international show, baby. So it's great to have you listening, Jay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for telling your buddies. And I would love to get to the East Coast. In fact, my goal is to get out there in the next year or two. Maybe take a 2-week trip and do a bunch of interviews, see a bunch of shops. I mean, there's so much history out there with traditional boats that it would be very exciting, and I'm starting to connect with a few people there, so that's pretty cool. So other than that, personally, my work is getting busier. My accounting work, I've picked up a new client, and I'm working a little bit more. So I'm going to be doing a little more podcast recording in the evenings, and that's good because you always like to have the income coming in. And speaking of income coming in, if you are going to be purchasing supplies to build a boat, especially your epoxies and fiberglass cloth and that sort of thing, if you go to my website, I have a logo there for Jamestown Distributors, and if you click on that, it takes you to their website. They've got a lot of great products for boats. If you make a purchase, I get paid a small commission, and that helps defray the cost of the show. So think about that. If you're going to buy something, I would appreciate it. Well, let's get on with the interview now. This interview is with Steve Chapain of Hudson Point Boat Shop. Take it away, Steve. It is March 20th, 2012, and I am with Steve Chapain. Steve, did I spell that or pronounce that correctly?
That's right.
Okay, Steve Chapain of the Point Hudson Boat Shop. Steve, welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. And wow, you got a really cool shop here. Lots of fun stuff going on here. Let's start with kind of where you're from and maybe your early childhood, if you did any boating, that type of stuff with your family.
Yeah. Well, I was born and raised in Minnesota, and I've always been around water and around boats, and grew up on the shores of a lake there, and just been around them all my life.
Yeah, what type of boating did your family do?
They were pretty heavily into water skiing.
Okay.
Competitive water skiing.
Really?
Yeah. It's a great way to get exercise and not realize you're exercising. You're having so much fun.
Yeah.
But I got interested in canoeing, and there was a lot of sailing around there, and I think all sorts of things like that.
Yeah. So when you were growing up there, were a lot of the boats were wood at that time?
Yeah.
Mostly wood or half wood? Or?
Yeah. My formative years there were in the 60s and 70s, and there was still a lot of wood boats around, but the newer boats were fiberglass, and those folks would get the fiberglass boats out in the spring, and they'd be the first ones on the water, and the rest of the boat owners, the wooden boat owners, would still be, sanding and varnishing and lamenting about, how they'd rather be on the water. And I remember my dad saying to me, "Don't ever get a wooden boat."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He didn't listen to his advice, Steve.
No.
So did you? Isn't there an area up there called the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness? Did you do any?
Oh yeah.
Canoeing up there?
Yeah, I did a lot of canoeing up there.
Okay.
Great
portaging
place.
And all that stuff.
Yeah. There's so much water up there that's the easiest way to get around.
Mm-hmm.
And still to this day, there are very few roads there.
Yeah.
And that continues on up into the Quetico Provincial Park, and on the Ontario side huge area of lakes.
Yeah. Were you up there on some wooden canoes, wood canvas canoes, or aluminum or fiberglass? 'Cause
I think the first canoeing I did up there was that was in an aluminum canoe.
Yeah.
Kind of a bomb-proof thing.
Yeah, you just kind of beat it up all the way along there. Huh? Yeah. So that's kind of when you first started boating. So how long were you in Minnesota, or when did you move out to the Northwest?
I moved out to Port Townsend 1989. I had been out here visiting a brother of mine who lives out here, and kind of exploring the area by kayak, and I'd heard about the boat school and gotten interested in that.
Oh, really?
And in my case, I was laid off from a job that I had in Minneapolis, and they closed the plant down where I worked, and it was just a perfect opportunity to try something different.
I see. Okay.
And, the timing was right for me. I remember meeting Bob Prothero, and
oh, really?
He was encouraging me to come and attend the school, and it was a few years later that this opportunity actually came for me to spend a little time out here and go to the school. And at the time I was thinking that I'd like to do some cruising on a sailboat, but I knew that there was no way that I could afford to hire people to maintain my boat. So I thought, going to the boat school would be a good place to, get some skills to take care of my boat.
Yeah.
And so with that avocational intent, somehow here I am, I wound up doing it as a vocation.
Wow.
And still here doing it.
So when you first went to the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building down in Port Hadlock, I guess it was it up here in Port Townsend then when you
Yeah, at that time it was at Glen Cove Industrial Park. And,
okay.
And in 1989, I think they'd been there just a year or two at that point, and they had moved from their site down in the boat haven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you graduated from the school down there. What did you do right after that, Steve?
I had a couple of jobs that I did, restoration projects that I rented space at the boat school.
And boat restoration projects?
Yeah. I think the first one was a little work on a little Norwegian double-ender, kind of a cute little fish boat. And then I had the good fortune to do a kind of a conversion of a 6-meter, a famous 6-meter called Saga.
Huh.
That's a one-design boat that, or not a one-design, but this particular one, which it was built in, I think about 1935, was the basis for the international one design that was modeled after the Saga.
Mm-hmm.
So I brought the Saga in there. We worked on it in a bay of their outdoor shed, and so I kind of set up business just
right there at the school.
Yeah, under their wing, and that was kind of a good way to get started. Not really knowing anybody else in town and kind of being green, and just was able to get going on my own project. And that was successful. And the owner of the boat is a naval architect, and so he was able to carefully describe what he wanted, and I just faithfully reproduced that.
So when you say a conversion on that boat, what do you mean by that?
Well, that boat is a 37-foot sloop that's built for racing.
Oh.
And it's It's got really light scantlings. It's half-inch thick mahogany planking.
Wow.
And the frames in it, I think, are probably 1-inch square steam bent oak.
Wow.
On a pretty tight center, probably 9 inches on center.
Yeah.
And that really lightweight stuff supports a lead keel that's probably 5 tons. And on a 37-foot boat, it's just an amazing structure.
Wow.
And a beautiful shape as well. And so I took this famous design, and the owner wanted to be able to cruise the boat a little bit with his family. And so he drew this little cabin that had about, I think it was about 5 inches high off the deck.
Oh.
Really low profile.
So it had no cabin before that?
Yeah, it was just an open boat.
Oh.
So this little tiny cabin enclosed a little bit of the cockpit and made just a tiny space below that they could sleep in. And so we were kind of messing with a pretty famous design, and I wanted to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that project turned out well, and he went out and cruised with that boat.
Yeah. He's raced, and he's still racing it today, and cruising it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And after that, I think I landed a little job in this shop, working on a spidscatter. It was in the shop here, and one thing led to another. And
so did somebody else have this shop at that time?
Yeah, there's a fellow named Ed Luchard.
Okay.
Who's a boat builder in town, and also a boat school graduate.
Okay.
Who ran the shop as it's hard to describe. It was a space where people could bring their boat in and work on it, rent some space, or he'd have a project that he'd hire people to work with him on it. And,
I see.
Kind of a variety of things. And,
yeah.
And so I was working on a boat that was in here that another boat builder had been working on.
Okay.
And he had left the project, so I sort of took over.
Mm-hmm. Oh. What year was that, Steve?
That was 1990.
1990.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, did you stay here in this shop and to start growing your business? Or
Yeah,
what did you do
pretty
then?
much. I worked on jointly with Ed on some projects in the shop here, and then other things that I brought in, and I've just had pretty much a continuous string of projects that worked out, and then as time went on and things evolved, I came into ownership of the shop.
Okay. Yeah.
Kept it going.
So tell me something about some of the your favorite projects you've worked on over the years.
Well, wow, there's a lot of them. They tend to be kind of my most recent ones. They're the ones that are easily the most memorable. But,
yeah.
And that recently was a new foremast for the schooner Martha.
Okay.
That I was telling you a bit about earlier.
Yeah.
And we made a hollow 60-foot spruce mast using the bird's mouth construction.
Mm-hmm.
And I've built a couple other spars over the years, and the biggest one was probably as a restoration of a 72-foot spruce mast.
Wow.
For a Rhodes catch, about a 70-foot Rhodes motor sailor.
Wow.
And that was a big, heavy spar, hollow spruce mast.
Really, 72 feet, huh?
Yeah. Ed and I did a restoration and conversion of a lifeboat, a surf-launched lifeboat that was built in about 1907, I think. And the customer brought it in to us, and we did some major repairs on the hull and built a cabin for it and a sailing rig for it. And, we just had loads of fun working on that, and we had a crew of some other boat builders helping, and every step of the way it was just a fun project. And, and that boat now belongs to the Maritime Center.
Oh, really?
And they use for their programs.
A surf-launched lifeboat.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It was used for the life-saving service up until about 1925 in Coos Bay, Oregon.
Oh, really?
And what they would do is
swimmers and surfers type.
They had it on a horse-drawn cart, and when they needed to use it, they'd go down the beach as far as they could, close to the scene of the action, and then they would launch it in the surf. And it was an 8-oared rowboat, 26 feet long, and it had a sailing rig that you could put in it if you needed it, and water ballast tanks that you could fill up when you needed it. Pretty amazing boat. They built hundreds of those.
Double ender?
Yeah. Lap strake. Cypress planking.
Really?
Oak frames. It had a raised sole and scuppers to drain. If water would get into the cockpit area, it would drain out the side, so it was self-ballast or self-bailing.
Really?
In that way. And so it had a crew of 8 oarsmen and a coxswain.
Oh, man, that's a serious lifeboat.
But the life-saving service surplused it in about 1925, and a fellow by the name of Amos Bird bought the thing at auction and had a cabin put on it, and he was an explorer and a photographer, and at that time he'd been exploring all the rivers along the West Coast, and over his lifetime he explored pretty much every river on the coast and wrote about it, and he'd written in the National Geographic about it. And so he took this boat that he did this conversion on and put it on a freighter, took it down to Patagonia, and over the course of a season down there, I think maybe a couple seasons, he sailed around all the way as far as to Cape Horn, and that trip was
really in that 26-foot lifeboat.
Yeah. So he wrote about that, and it came out in about 1937 in the National Geographic. And
wow!
And so he was kind of a famous guy in his little circles, and later took that same boat up to Alaska, did some exploring up there. And
did he ever put a cabin on it, or just ran it?
Well, yeah, he had the cabin that he had put on before this trip down to Patagonia.
Okay.
And the boat was brought to us in 1991 or 2, and it was kind of a wreck at that point, and just began languishing after being lost in a flood and the Vanport flood down on the Columbia River. So out of kind of homage to Amos Berg, the present owner of it wanted to restore this boat, and I don't know if he had a clear sense of what he wanted do with it other than just to restore it. And within a few years of our completing the project, he donated it to the Wooden Boat Foundation with the idea that they could continue using it for getting people out on the water exploring.
Yeah,
and
very cool. What was the sailing rig on that, Steve?
Originally, I think it was the life-saving service. I think might have had a leg of mutton rig on it, and the spars were short enough that you could step them by hand.
Oh,
and when you would take them out and stow them, they'd fit inside the boat.
I see. Oh, okay.
And what we put on there was a much bigger rig, a sloop rig with a gaff main on it, and a fixed mast. It's on a tabernacle, and actually, two people can step that mast, and it's still pretty usable.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So, do you have any personal boats that you use yourself?
Yeah. Well, I every chance I get, I'm rowing a shell.
Okay.
And
what kind of shell do you have?
I've got a couple. I've got a Pocock single, cedar single, flat water racing shell, and I also row a Moss 24 open water rowing shell.
Really?
It's a fiberglass boat.
Okay.
A little shorter, a little wider, a little more seaworthy, but still pretty quick.
Okay.
And on the waters around here, it's probably the more practical boat.
Yeah.
We're not known for flat water in Port Townsend.
Right.
And I have a sailboat.
Oh, do you?
As well, a gaff yawl that was built in 1930 up in Vancouver.
Oh, really?
And I've been working at trying to get both sailing and rowing to integrate in my life. Sometimes they're kind of hard to work out, but you'd think that they're pretty compatible. Sailing is great when it's windy, and rowing is great when it's calm.
Yeah.
But part of the problem is that I've got a job that I gotta make a living at.
Yeah, right.
There's not enough time for it all.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us about the. I think you took over the Pocock wooden boat production and repair from Pocock. Tell me about that whole thing.
Well, I had this opportunity that I just never would have expected came my way. I'd gotten interested in repairing and restoring these cedar shells, just kind of as a diversion while I was working on my own sailboat, kind of a long-term restoration, and had really no way to get my fix on the water. And some friends in town were rowing these shells, and so I learned from them to scull, and then a friend I helped him restore a pair, cedar Pocock pair, and really enjoyed that work. A pair is a two-person rowing shell that each person has one oar.
Oh, okay.
And it's probably the most difficult boat to row. There's no rudder, and you steer it by coordinating with your partner.
Really?
And it's the most challenging, but also I think the most rewarding. And it just turns out that my friend and I both rowed in college.
Oh.
And he had been a port oar, and I'd been a starboard oar, and we were just kind of perfectly matched. And,
wow.
And so we rowed that boat for quite a number of years and really enjoyed it. And during that restoration, we actually went over to Pocock factory to get some materials, and we both just fell in love with the place over there, the shop.
Was that in Seattle?
At the time, it was in Everett.
Oh, really?
Just about downtown Everett. And,
really? Where at in Everett?
Right now, that spot was by the freeway.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one of the Pacific?
Yeah, I think Pacific. I can't recall the address exactly, but a few years ago, they moved to a place that's right next to the Boeing plant, so just a few miles away, still in Everett.
Yeah, okay.
And that actually was kind of what opened up this opportunity for me. By that time, the factory had been they'd been going a long transition from wood to fiberglass to carbon fiber in the materials that they build their boats out of, and even way back in the late 70s and early 80s, they knew that the days were numbered, that they'd be able to continue getting the materials to build the cedar shells. And so as they were able to successfully make the fiberglass boats, slowly they quit building the 8s, and then they quit building the 4s, and on down the line. And at the time that my friend and I went over to the factory to get materials for this pair, there was one guy working there on wood boats building singles, and he was in his 70s at the time, and he'd been working there forever.
How long ago was this, Steve?
This was when would that have been? About late 90s.
Okay.
And we asked him if they ever took on apprentices or people to help in the shop, and he said no. When he retires, he said that's it. They're going to burn all the stuff and just destroy it. They don't want anybody to build their boats. The
wooden version. Yeah,
that would build a bad boat. We just got to get rid of it all. And so we figured, well, that was it. But we back in Port Townsend had actually started to restore some other wood shells that were around. One year, also in Everett, the Everett Rowing Association called up the Wooden Boat Foundation and asked if they would like to have a free wood Pocock 8 that they wanted to get rid of.
Really?
And I was a board member there at the time, and the director of the Boat Foundation looked at me and said, well, you interested? So I thought, sure, let's do it. We took this boat, we started working on it just with the idea it'd be fun to row this thing in the bay, and it just attracted all sorts of attention. People wanted to work on the boat. There were people in town who had experience working on the boats, and one way or the other, we got this boat on the water and we started rowing it, and it was just a joy.
Wow.
And we were rowing one day. We rowed all the way down to the cut in Hadlock and back, and that's probably 6 miles each way, and we just had a great row, and we were all on a kind of an endorphin high, and we approached the shore back here in town, and somebody said, "Oh, there's that old guy on the shore looking at us. It looks like George or Stan Pocock," and it turned out it was the fellow who actually built the boat that we were rowing. we were rowing an 8-oared shell that was built in the late 50s by Stan Pocock. And he was just beaming. He was so pleased to see that we had fixed this boat up and were rowing it. And,
wow.
That we had the interest and the talent to figure it out. And actually that was kind of a model for what became our rowing club is repairing and rowing these wood shells.
Wow. So you guys have a rowing club here?
It's called the Rat Island Rowing and Sculling Club, and the club's changed a little bit over the years. That they no longer are exclusively devoted to wood boats, but they're still rowing these shells, and so over the years we restored a number of these boats, and so Stan Pocock was well aware of what we were doing, and he was also aware of what was happening back at the factory, which at that point he no longer owned, but was aware of what they were up to and knew that they were going to destroy this apparatus to build the single when they made this move in Everett. And so he was thinking, well, maybe us folks in Port Townsend would be in a position to do something with all that apparatus. And I found out later that I think what they were imagining is that maybe we'd have a little display that we'd put at the boat festival and kind of show off how these old relics were made. But I was more interested in actually making the boats and kind of following through with this vision that they had when we earlier had visited the factory. And so we agreed to take it. They actually just gave it to me. It was
so
more
it's
than
a strong back with all the stations on it.
Well, it was more than that. It was a huge pile of stuff that had been dismantled and just put in a corner of their shop. And it was truckloads of stuff.
Really?
And it was so daunting that there was no way that I felt I could really take this on myself. And in talking with the Boat Foundation, they were interested in actually being a part of this. So we formed a partnership where they would actually own it, and I would resurrect all this apparatus and figure out how to build the thing. And so their resources were they were able to put a business plan together and kind of cook up a way that we could carry off this project and do the marketing and that part of it, and then I would concentrate on the building.
Very cool.
So I also had the goodwill and blessings of the Pocock factory, and the one fellow that had just retired was willing to help me, but he was ailing from emphysema and wasn't really capable of working directly with me, and so I would just kind of toil away trying to figure out the puzzle, and when I could, I'd call him and spend long hours talking on the phone with him and help me through the process.
Cool, very cool. So you have a website that you've got information about the shells on. What's the address for that for our listeners?
It's called pocockclassic.org. And
how do you spell that, Pocock?
Pocock.
Okay.
And classic is singular. And so on that website, we've got some historical pages of the Pocock shells as they were built when the factory was building the cedar shells. And then we've got stories of the building process, and also owners of the boats that we've sold, and kind of a site for kind of a registry of owners
Cool.
of the boats and what they've been doing with
Okay.
them.
Cool. So you build new boats. If somebody wanted to purchase one, they could come to you and order one, or you have some for sale here in the shop also.
I've got a couple of boats that are ready for sale. One of these is hanging right over your head.
Yeah.
Another one is over at the Maritime Center in the chandlery there, and actually it's the Maritime Center who does the retailing.
I see.
Of the boats.
Yeah. Okay.
And but as it turns out, a lot of people really want to see the actual place where they're built.
Right. Yeah, very, very cool. So what other stuff do you do here in the boat shop, Steve? If people are interested in repairs or boat building or stuff, what kind of stuff do you do?
Well,
give us your little commercial.
I focus on wood in the shop as much as I can.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, I just finished building a spruce mast for a schooner Martha.
Yeah.
So I'll build and restore masts. We've had a number of sailboats and power boats in the shop. Period restorations. A lot of those have been. Kind of wood repairs.
Okay, very good. And what's your phone number here, Steve, if somebody wanted to call you?
It's area code 360-385-6863.
Okay, very good. And then any parting comments for our listeners, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to thank you for your interest and enjoyed talking with you.
Good. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Steve. Appreciate it. And we'll be in touch. Thank you. Thanks, Steve, so much for taking the time to do the interview. It was great to see your shop and look at your rowing shells and just talk about boats and fun stuff. I could kind of do that all day long, all night long, and that sort of thing. It's kind of addictive. So thanks again, Steve. Appreciate it. And for my listeners out there, thanks for tuning in again to the show. Next week we'll have another great interview, so please come back for that. Please connect with me if you haven't. I'd love to hear from you. Pictures, information, stories. If you have ideas for people I could interview, I'd like to listen to those too. Even though I've got a pretty good list going, I like to get new ideas there because I'm going to keep filling the pipeline for interviews. And please connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, or Pinterest, Wooden Boat Dan. Or you can call my voicemail feedback hotline, 424-261-2360. You can also email me, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. And please subscribe in iTunes and leave me a 5-star review. Well, that's it for this week, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, Wooden Boat Dan's having a blast with this, so tune in again next week for the latest adventures in wooden boats. This is Wooden Boat Dan over and out. Keep the sunny side up and the barnacled side down. Have a good week. See you later. Bye.